Romans 9 is considered Calvinist meat. It is believed Romans 9 has solid truths which can only support Calvinism. A number of statements commonly used as proof texts for unconditional predestination. For example, God has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills he hardens. God as a potter can do what he likes with the same clay to make a good or a bad vessel. He has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills he hardens. Does not the potter have power over the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honour and another for dishonour? If God has mercy on whom he fancies, and hardens anybody else likewise, then it is not man who decides if he receives mercy or not, is it? If we are like clay in a potter's hand, with no saying what God makes of us, then unconditional predestination to salvation is true, isn't it? He wills irrespective of who we are or what we do then? Is that what Paul is teaching? No. Paul demonstrated God gives mercy in righteousness, with his example of Moses being told, God has mercy on whom he wills. So it is how God imparts mercy that's relevant. And just as it is how God imparts mercy that is needful to understand, so it is with God hardening. How God hardens is needful to see. Let's look at the passage that introduces the hardening of heart by God. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, even for this same purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be declared in all the earth. Therefore he has mercy on whom he wills, and whom he wills he hardens. Here we see Paul returning to his look at God's work in the nations, which he introduced in Romans 9 verse 7 with the word nor, after clearly looking at salvation in Romans 9 verse 6. Paul covered how mercy functions. Let's see the new context he alludes to show how hardening works. Pharaoh is seen as used by God to show his power in the nations. How God does this is important to note. The context shows how God hardens hearts and uses people in this way. This is then confirmed explicitly by Paul with the different Greek verbs used in ending this section of thought in verses 22 to 23, the final context. Paul says this, relating back to Pharaoh. What if God, wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath prepared for destruction? Let's see this long suffering with Pharaoh. Just as the final context of Paul mentioning God hardens whom he wills involves Romans 9 verses 22 to 23, so also the mention of Pharaoh involves a context. That context shows Pharaoh hardened his own heart without outside influence 6 times before the Lord in his long suffering then hardened it a further 6 times. 1. Following the casting down of Moses' rod and the serpent sign, Pharaoh's heart grew hard. 2. Following the turning of the Nile to blood, the magicians of Egypt did so also, and Pharaoh's heart grew hard. 3. After the plague of frogs had been lifted, Pharaoh saw that there was relief. He hardened his heart and did not heed them. 4. After the plague of lice, even though the magicians could not do likewise, Pharaoh's heart grew hard. 5. After the plague of flies, despite his assurances to Moses, Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time also. 6. After the plague of death on Egypt's livestock, the heart of Pharaoh became hard, and he did not let the people go. Then, and only then, do we see the Lord strengthen, Hebrew Jacques, what was already in Pharaoh's heart. 1. After the plague of boils that broke out in sores on man and beast, the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh. 2. After the plague of hail and fire, the heart of Pharaoh was hard, for I have hardened his heart. 3. After the plague of locusts, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. 4. After the plague of darkness, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. 5. After the impending death of the firstborn, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go out of his land. This is more of a blanket statement to the preceding 4 times, since Pharaoh let the people go after the death of the firstborn. So really, the next event is 5. After Pharaoh had let the children of Israel go, he decided to pursue them because the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. 6. Despite the pillar of cloud put in their way and the seeing of the divide of the waters of the sea, Pharaoh chased after the children of Israel on the now dry land, right to their own deaths, because, and I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. So I will gain honour over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Pharaoh hardened his heart himself 6 times. Only then the Lord hardened it a further 6 times. So this tallies with Paul's mention of God being long-suffering, and reveals his method. Is this hardening of heart related to decisions or desires not already in the individual? No. Are those whose hearts are hardened already in possession of hard hearts? Yes. So, God has mercy in righteousness on whom he wills, and he hardens in righteousness whom he wills. This addresses the objection Paul raised. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? For who has resisted his will? Paul immediately replies to this objection with saying God has the right to do what he likes. He is God. But then confirms how he does this with the 2 different Greek verbs in his ongoing explanation in verses 22 to 23. He says God can do what he likes with the illustration of the potter in a rhetorical question. Does not the potter have power over the clay from the same lump to make one vessel for honour and another for dishonour? But as he expands on this, how God does it is confirmed. What if God, wanting to show his wrath and to make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath prepared katetis mena for destruction, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy, which he had prepared beforehand, proetoimasen, for glory? Is the potter illustration to do with salvation? No. It is an extension to the mention of Pharaoh. Is it to do with the purpose of God in the nations? Yes. So of course God can do what he likes with people's lives in the nations. But how he does this shows his righteousness as it relates to the hearts of the individuals used. This is what is missed out of context. Their salvation is dependent on God's righteous judgment and mercy. For example, to the merciful he will be merciful. Conclusion. Is anyone afore-prepared for wrath? No. Is anyone hardened, whose heart is not already hard, of their own making? No. Does God do what he likes with people for making known his power or his glory in the nations in righteousness? Yes. Addendum. For further expansion of Romans 9 verses 22 to 23, watch this video. Paul then returns to those called in Romans 9 verse 24. Even us whom he called, not of the Jews only, but also of the Gentiles. Having shown how the individual gets called in conditional election in Romans 8, Paul here in Romans 9 says this comprises of both Jews and Gentiles.